So much for joining us. Hi all who are joining in. This is our fourth session here at Urban Sitter. Thank you very much to Lynn and Andrea and Urban Sitter for hosting us today. London, we have 10,000 members on the Main Street Mamas parent community, so we're really excited to bring your perspective on parent-facing problems and family-facing issues to the organization. So thanks so much for taking time with us. Would you mind just starting off giving us a little bit of background on yourself and introducing yourself to the community?
So I grew up in San Francisco, born and raised here. My grandmother, she raised me in the Western Addition community in public housing. Lived there over 20 years of my life, went to public schools, and was really fortunate because a lot of things happened in my neighborhood around me, the drugs, the violence, the frustration, the hopelessness. That was my normal growing up, and so I was really fortunate to be able to go to college, finish at UC Davis, and I got my master's in public administration at USF. And it had everything to do with the support and the encouragement of people around me, my community, my teachers, the Mayor's Youth Employment and Training Program, which gave me my first job at age 14. Just being exposed to opportunity changed my life. But sadly, I was coming home to funerals of my friends on a regular basis, and so I committed my life to working in the community to change and to save lives. And I'm proud of the work that I've done in the Western Addition over the years. Really getting young people on the right path so that they could have a better outcome. Sadly, I have a brother who is in prison. I have a sister who I lost to a drug overdose. And the reason why I'm so actively engaged in community affairs has everything with wanting to change what is normal. I know that if we make better decisions here in San Francisco, we could basically change the outcome of a lot of people and a lot of communities. I ran for supervisor because I got frustrated with City Hall and how we make decisions and how it doesn't always impact people's lives. So when I first became a member of the Board of Supervisors, I basically, asked the Housing Authority, how many empty public housing units do we have? And it turns out there were 179 empty public housing units that had been empty for years. So I went to the mayor and I asked him basically if he would give the Housing Authority the $2 million they need to renovate those units. And he said, of course. And we placed 179 formerly homeless families in those units within a year. Things that aren't legislative, but are just some basic things that we should be doing as a city in order to change things for the better. And I'm running for mayor because I feel strongly that we need someone who is bold, who is fearless, who will put forth creative ideas to deal with some of these most challenging issues. I mean, I've been here my whole life, and I want to see San Francisco improve because I want to be here for the rest of my life. I want to make life better for people who are part of the communities that I grew up in. And so I want to change what we see, the dirty streets, the homelessness, the issues around housing affordability, things that we know that matter to people around transportation. How do we as a city begin to change the direction? We can't be afraid to make the hard decisions. And I think that's been my frustration as someone who has been on the Board of Supervisors, watching as, there are some of the loudest voices deciding what happens, and it doesn't always positively impact people's lives. So I'm proposing a few things that are somewhat controversial, but I think will help us address this issue because people who are living on our streets, sadly, are suffering from mental illness. They're suffering from addiction, things that aren't going to go away because we don't want to see them. We have to do something different. We can't just wish that they would get solved. I have people on my personal caseload that I can't get housed because of their challenges with their mental illness and addiction. So I want us to reform our mental health system. I want us to make the kind of changes where we're not treating it like a criminal issue, where we're locking people up and 72 hours later they're right back in the same spot, still without help, without medication, without the support that they need. So instead of treating it like a criminal issue, we should treat it like the public health crisis that it is. In fact, I got legislation passed through the Board of Supervisors to take the responsibility of conservatorship out of the district attorney's office and move it over to the city attorney's office so that they can handle those cases where they handle things like they do with child conservatorships. And as mayor, I want to make sure that our departments are working together.
And do you mind to break down the conservatorship and maybe just explain that to some of our lay people?
So a conservatorship process, it just basically is providing a guardian for someone who can't make decisions for themselves. And so oftentimes you have people who are mentally ill who basically are, for example, the person that I am actually working with, he's a schizophrenic, he's a senior, and I've gotten him into the navigation centers several times, and at least 2. He won't stay in the navigation center. He gets robbed every time he cashes his check. He won't take medication. There's just a lot of challenges there, and every now and then he loses his mind, and no help, no oversight.
So with a conservatorship?
With a conservatorship, there will be someone who can manage things, make decisions for him, make decisions about his money, about his medication, and about where he should specifically be. And part of the other side of it is we need mental health stabilization beds. And we opened 54 new mental health stabilization beds at St. Mary's Hospital. I think the last count I heard there were about 16 that were occupied of the 54. Yes.
Okay.
The 54, there are about 16 that are occupied. And the point is, this is definitely a locked facility, and the purpose is not to permanently institutionalize anyone. It is to get someone into a healthy environment, to get them the help and the support they need, to get them on the right path so that we can get them housed and so that they can keep their housing.
And how long has that been available to them?
Well, what do you mean, how long?
At St. Mary's.
Oh, this just opened up.
Okay.
This just opened up. And we have another location at General Hospital. We have the Hummingbird, and we don't have enough. And part of my platform is to basically require all hospitals in San Francisco to have mental health stabilization beds. Mental illness is a part of our world. And we need to come up with more solutions to deal with it, and everyone has to play a role in dealing with it. And so I want to work with the hospital community to make sure that they're contributing to assisting with this population as well. So you want me to keep going?
Sure.
Okay.
Keep going. I mean, the other side of that, we hear a lot about having, the minute clinics that would be on the bottom floor of a housing facility, or where we would have SRO housing for some of the homeless. This seems like a really, I know you said you're looking for creative solutions. This sounds like a really creative solution.
This is one of many. It's not going to be one thing that we do. In fact, we actually house most of our formerly homeless individuals here in the city in single room occupancy hotels. And sometimes those environments aren't the best environment for people to get healthy, especially because of the challenges with the easy access to drugs and other things that exist in those particular areas. But we have a place in my district called the Richardson Apartments. It's 120 units with supportive services for some of the most, they're not homeless anymore, but they were some of the most chronically homeless individuals who were basically living on the streets, who were struggling, who were mentally ill, who have a lot of challenges.
What was the recipe for success for those individuals? What sort of social services did you see working that you would implement as mayor to replicate that success?
So part of the support that some of these individuals see, of course, their case management, their medical professionals on site, their people who directly help and support this population. And let's just be clear, it's still challenging because these are people in some instances who were actually homeless for over 20 years, who have they have challenges with their mental capacity. So they're still a work in progress, but the point is they have housing, and we will continue to support and serve them and work with them as best as we can. So I think this is one of the best models for supporting this population because it means permanent housing. But there's one resident of this housing complex who hardly stays in their housing, which is another challenge because, again, he had been homeless for over 20 years out on the streets. And so there's continues to be a challenge there. So we just have to keep working at it for sure.
Great, thanks. And so when we're interfacing with families, there are 3 pressing issues that continue to come up. affordable childcare is one of the first and foremost issues that families have been asking about, and would love to know your position on affordable childcare and early education, and how you're reacting to Prop C.
So basically, I think one of the challenges is that we fund childcare, but the people who are kind of just above that threshold, they don't qualify for subsidized childcare. And then oftentimes there are a lot of families who qualify for subsidized childcare that are on lengthy wait lists. We opened over 100 slots in the Bayview Hunters Point community for childcare, but can't find teachers because people can't afford to live in San Francisco. So it is a real challenge with the teachers, it's a real challenge with finding affordable childcare. And I think what we have to do as a city is basically incorporate how we fund and support childcare in the same way that we do our public schools. It has to be something that just naturally is a part of what we do. The challenge that we have, and Proposition C and Proposition D, they draw from the same funding sources. And so Proposition D is basically housing for all. It's a housing ballot measure that pays for housing for people who are homeless, pays for housing for seniors, for middle income residents, because this is one of the most pressing needs that we have is housing and housing affordability. And so as it relates to childcare and funding childcare, I definitely as mayor want to make sure that we're exploring all the opportunities to fund childcare, but Proposition C is just not about childcare. And it basically, most of the money actually goes into the general fund, and if I'm mayor, I want to make sure that that money is used responsibly, and of course, to help pay for childcare as well. But we have a real pressing need as it relates to housing, and it's why I'm supporting Proposition D.
Thank you. In regard to clean streets, I know we talked about homelessness and housing. Can you talk to us a little bit about, or a lot of it?
I can talk a lot about it.
Can you talk a lot of it about clean streets?
Yes.
And again, a lot of our families are concerned about the reality of needles in our playgrounds and our sandboxes.
Yes.
In our public parks, and then in many parts of the city, human feces, and just simply keeping our streets cleaned. What's your approach to this?
So, two things. Number one, and Haight-Ashbury has been one of my most challenging neighborhoods. And so we basically, this program that started on its own called Taking It to the Streets.
So we've talked a lot about Christian, or I've brought up Christian's program.
Yeah. And Christian basically started off with raising money and funding about, housing for about 10 formerly homeless young people. And so when I found out what he was doing and just really meeting people where they are and getting them to clean up the streets and working with DPW and that sort of thing, I said, wait a minute, this is a great model. Not only can we get people housed, but we could also clean up the streets and then also, bring people into some sort of program so we can help them, because we have a lot of programs, but some of these young people aren't necessarily ready for those programs. And so Christian is the kind of guy, he meets people where they are, and he's been amazing. And so I got actively engaged. I've raised public and private money to help support his program. He's now housing 64 young people. And part of their responsibility is to clean the streets, is to be community ambassadors, and to help with the neighborhood. And, the Haight-Ashbury still has its challenges, but I've seen improvement. And what I appreciate, too, are the people who live there. They embrace this program, they respect it, they support it, and they're glad to have, this new relationship with people who before they just felt they shouldn't be a part of the neighborhood. To be clear, there are still some challenges in the neighborhood that exist.
There are,
yes.
And so when I started this organization, this group, we were called Haight Street Mamas. I lived right on Waller and Ashbury, so I was very familiar with you as a supervisor, and have to give you a lot of credit for really showing up to the community. And I know have seen you many times, whether it's at the police department there or at community meetups, and also very familiar with events that you maybe have participated at Booksmith or Bindery, and Kristen Evans and other shopkeepers on Haight Street have really met the community where they're at and educated the population of Haight Street and Lower Cole Valley the Upper Haight and really engage the community to take action as well. So I think one thing that I've seen work well with Christian's model is that Christian is also accessible to the community and will educate the community on how you can engage as well.
And he works with the police department.
Absolutely.
And when I started as supervisors, we had 2 beat officers, and now we have 16, and they still only have 2 beat officers at Union Square. And so that's part of my advocacy and pushing for more resources. But again, it's about developing a relationship. You know about the purchase of the McDonald's sites on Haight and Staniel. We're going to build 100% affordable housing on this site. And I'm excited about that. And I think, the challenge is, people struggle. And how do we address that issue and not make something else, problematic for everyone else
Sure.
who's trying to live in the same community.
So to be clear, when we're talking about affordable housing at the McDonald's site, are we talking about the $150,000 to $180,000 income bracket? Is that affordable housing at that site, or is it below $150,000 annual income?
So basically, a decision has not been made, but 100% affordable housing, basically usually with federal tax credits and other things, it's usually 55% and below.
Mm-hmm.
But my hope is that we increase the affordability levels, because teachers can't qualify for 55% of AMI and below.
Sure.
And I want to see family housing. I want to see us build family housing. I want to make sure that families making, like a family of 4, making up to $130,000 a year could actually qualify for affordable housing. Proposition D is a tool that we need to help pay for middle income housing, because even though we've changed our inclusionary housing laws to increase the affordability levels, we still have to build the housing, and we need an income source to do so. And Proposition D is an important key to achieving that goal. And you also mentioned safe injection sites, and I want to go back to that.
Since there's a near proximity between the safe injection site and the McDonald's, can we talk about?
So I want to talk about that because
in my head I was just thinking about the 2-minute walk between those 2 sites.
Yeah, and you know what? The point that I was making about Christian's program is I think that could be used as a model to clean up our streets in San Francisco. The other thing is, in meeting with the service providers in the Haight-Ashbury community, I basically have asked them to also be mindful and also tell their clients to be respectful of the neighborhood and clean up after themselves, and let us know what might be needed to improve on services. Like we added a pit stop. We have people who are at the Decaux toilet on a regular basis monitoring the Decaux toilet. The flushes.
Is that on Buena Vista?
That's on Stanion and Haight, at the entrance of the park.
Yes. I was thinking the SF Public Works houses.
Well, there's one. That one's at Buena Vista.
Okay.
But there's another one that's a Decaux toilet.
Yep.
The flushes have gone up over 400% after we added an attendant to that particular area. So people are using it as a restroom.
As a restroom.
And so
I don't know if everyone's familiar with Hippie Hill, or Hippie Hell as I call it. But But yes, that's really exciting to hear. People are using it as a restroom. They're not using it as an injection site.
Yeah. And so part of, I want to be clear about, why I've basically led the charge around safe injection sites. I started on this journey last year to explore what they could actually mean, because I get the emails with parents who are sending me the photos of these needles in playgrounds, and it is heartbreaking that a kid could even stumble on something like this. And so part of the reason why I wanted to explore this is because what we're doing isn't working, and I wanted to understand how this could work. This is not just about opening up a place and opening up the door and making it easy for people to use drugs. This is also about medical professionals, treatment on the demand, the ability to help someone potentially get clean, not force anyone into treatment, but when someone needs treatment, it's right there in the same facility. In Vancouver, Canada, I had a chance to visit a location called Insight, met this guy named Derwin. I mean, he was like the most exciting person that I've met. I just said, how are you working in a facility like this? You're watching people shoot up all the time and you're all excited. And he said, because when they're ready to get clean, they come to me. They've referred over 3,400 people to detox right upstairs who basically did not go back through their system. And so part of it is, we want to bring the needles indoors. We want to bring the people indoors. We want to make sure people aren't ODing. And more importantly, I think we want to try and save lives by helping people get the treatment that they need. Addiction can happen to anyone. at any time. I've had the personal experience of getting the phone calls from my sister and saying, I need help, I'm in the TL, here I am, come get me, go down into TL, nowhere to be found. And she had been in one program before. It was called Walden House. It's now called Health Right 360. And it is a challenge. And I know people deal with this on a regular basis. And ultimately, I want to get the needles off the streets. I want to get people off the streets and from normalizing shooting up publicly. And part of the solution could be safe injection sites where we could not only get more people indoors and get the needles off the street, but we could hopefully refer more people to treatment.
Great, thanks. I want to hear some of your other, I'm gonna go off question a little bit. I kind of want to hear more about your radical ideas. Do you have some magical creative solutions for working class families?
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite ideas that you're loving talking about right now?
So right now,
I feel like it's 3:30 on a Friday. Let's chat.
So mental health is one, just reforming the conservatorship program and supporting. I'm excited about Senator Scott Wiener's bill, SB 1045, which will add another definition to make it easier to conserve someone who's mentally ill and get them help. Basically, I'm probably one of the few persons who's running for mayor who actually supports this idea, along with safe injection sites. I'm pushing that forward, and I want to be responsible. I'm not trying to shove anything down anyone's throat, but I want people to understand how these specific things can work. The other thing I'm talking about is housing and building more housing faster and cutting back on the bureaucratic red tape that gets in the way of housing production, and also stepping outside of our comfort zone. McDonald's, basically, they didn't come to the city and say, you want to buy this site. I went to them. I went to talk to the owners because, as you know, that site was, just really the complaints I would get. And I thought, well, maybe if we build housing or do something different with that parking lot, maybe that could help get us to a better place. I asked them if they would work with us. They sold us a site for below market rate. We're going to build a housing on that site, but the housing is going to take forever to build. And that's another challenge here in San Francisco. So part of what I'm talking about is cutting back on the process, revamping the bureaucratic process, and if necessary, going to the voters with a proposed new process so that we can cut housing production in San Francisco in half. By getting rid of some layers that exist and get in the way, but also identifying opportunity sites like the McDonald's site on Haight and Stanton. Not that we can purchase every site we identify, but there are so many places where there could be a public-private partnership for development. Modular housing, and I know that that's a bit of a challenge. Modular housing, you can build faster and less expensive. I guess I can describe them. They're like Legos. They get built prefab. Yes, they get built in a factory, and then they get basically stacked on top of each other, and they're a faster, less expensive way to build housing. And I want to make sure that we're not only moving in that direction, but we're doing it with local labor. So I'm committed to continuing to work with the building trades to make sure, because they have some concerns about modular, but they did endorse me #1, and so I'm committed to working with them to move that forward. So my ideas...
Where would modular housing exist in San Francisco? I mean, my understanding is modular housing is much lower than the high-rises that you could build at McDonald's. Yeah. So would that mean putting it on a Superfund site?
Well, not necessarily much like the McDonald's site. It just depends on what we're going to be able to do at the McDonald's site. But I want to maximize the number of units that we can build there, but it depends on what the height is. So we could build modular housing in certain areas all over the city, and there are limitations to where you can build it, but the fact is it's possible. And so
that's exciting to hear.
Yes.
I know, I talk a little bit, today is all about you, but I am the product of a family that was able to be the recipients of affordable housing in Connecticut, where I grew up. I'm one of 5 kids. We're within 10 years. And when my father passed away and my mom had to close down our family business and file bankruptcy, we were recipients of affordable housing. My mother still lives there. It's the reason I was able to take advantage of public school in Fairfield County, Connecticut. So it's really a huge part of who I am and why I'm so fired up about affordable housing. And public schools. We should be able to take advantage of public schools as working class families, any families, but it should be an opportunity for our families. And I was able, owning a company in New York City that was family facing at the time when Bloomberg made public schools available to families in New York, and I want to see that happen here.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think it can happen. That we feel really great about our neighborhood schools.
Mm-hmm.
And what is your position on keeping children in their neighborhoods for schools versus the lottery that we have today? Or
Yeah, so first of all, I'm the only candidate who actually grew up in public housing in San Francisco, lived there for over 20 years of my life. And again, when you live in public housing, it's not by choice. It's like you don't have another option. And that was, just, again, a frustrating kind of experience. But I went to public schools as well, and I think I'm probably the only person running for mayor right now who actually went to public schools in San Francisco. And I strongly, strongly believe that kids should be able to go to the schools in their neighborhoods. We walked to school together when I was in elementary school and junior high. Relationships developed. We caught the bus to school together in high school. And I just think things changed when there was a change around school assignments. We weren't growing up together in the same community anymore. I was running the African American Art and Culture Complex at the time, and the challenge of getting kids out of school to the center and some of the issues there, and then just with some of the violence that existed and kids not knowing each other, and they live within 2 blocks of one another. I mean, insane. And I think, I'm not suggesting that that's the cause, but I think that plays a role with kids not knowing each other in communities, especially where there is a lot of violence. I think it's important that they do know each other at an early age and develop relationships. But ultimately, parents who are driving across town, travel time for kids on the muni buses, how all that impacts their ability to focus on their studies and learn, I just think it's wrong. And part of the reason why I put out an education platform had everything to do with saying, regardless of the fact that there's a school board and a superintendent, I am so committed to really trying to reform that system. And so I want my education policy advisor to help develop the case that we could take to courts to get them to make the changes to the school assignment system. I am so determined to do that because it breaks my heart that kids who live within a certain neighborhood can't just walk to the school like within 2 or 3 blocks from where they live. I think it's why we lose a lot of families in San Francisco. It's very frustrating for me, and so that's one of the things that's a part of my education platform, is to try and make the changes. Schools now are more segregated than they've ever been, and I just think it's not working. And if we can demonstrate a case to our courts that it isn't, then I would hope that we would go back to the way things were.
Great. Thanks, London.
Yeah,
Are we ready for some questions?
Yeah.
Oh, good.
These are some from our viewers. The first one is, please ask what can be done about muni drivers who won't allow a parent on a muni bus with a stroller.
Oh, that's not supposed to be happening.
Yeah.
Oh no! What could be done is, make sure you get that bus number and the time and the stop and location so that can be addressed. I mean, that shouldn't happen. That someone with a stroller can't get on the bus. That's insane.
Okay. I guess would that be a 311 report?
311, yes.
Great. Okay, and then please ask about, the questions asked to Jane Kim from the Chronicle, and if she wasn't behind that ad, how she feels about the attack ad.
What ad specifically?
I am not
Who's
sure.
asking?
This is Laura Nelson.
Oh.
Okay, I will keep going. How can we not have? I should read these before I actually.
That's okay. That's
So,
okay.
we can go back
we can
and
let,
talk.
we can go.
How?
If Laura wants to specify, we'd be happy to propose a question.
Yeah. How can we not have a choice component in such a segregated city? Why should zip code become educational destiny?
Well, I can only speak from my own personal experience, based on what I experienced as someone who actually went to public schools in my neighborhood, as someone who actually worked with kids who weren't going to the same schools in their neighborhood, and the challenges as an ED working with young people, and what I had to do to purchase a van to just move kids around to help parents with the challenges of moving kids from one side of town to the next. You know, I just think it's important that be a priority. And that's just how I personally feel, and it's something that as mayor I plan to work towards.
Do you think it could be a hybrid model of both? Sorry, this is just me asking.
Yeah,
Because I understand some parents would want a choice. I know not every neighborhood has a, the language immersion program, so I could see that being a choice. But then, other people want to do the neighborhood stuff, right? So is there something?
I just think from my perspective, what is important is to make sure that kids who live in a certain neighborhood and their parents want them to go to school in that neighborhood, they should have the priority. Now, in terms of all the other things that come into play, I do think that, why not? But just to be clear, we have, everyone's not going to get into the school of their choice, just in general. Everyone wants their kid to go to Lowell High School, but there are a lot of high schools in San Francisco, and not everyone's going to get in Lowell. So I just think part of what I want to see us do as a city is really focus on making our schools better, focus on supporting and paying our teachers more, which is why I support Prop G, making sure that there's a real link between housing production in the city and access to affordable housing for our teachers. I want to make sure that there's actual connections that work, and it's not going to be a one-size-fits-all, and not everyone is going to get what they want, but ultimately I want to make sure that we develop a good system so that parents want to raise their kids in San Francisco and they want to stay here. And there are some parents that don't have a choice based on if they have housing and have that opportunity. I mean, it's more complicated than it's this way or the highway. It's not about that, but I do feel strongly that kids should have priority in the neighborhoods that they live in.
Great. Do we have time for a few more? Sorry,
We do. What time is it?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
And we had some of you are actually put your education platform in this, so people can refer to that. Yes. Given your feelings about neighborhood schools, how do you feel about charter schools?
So charter schools, I really wish that, I know a lot of good charter schools, and I know that there's a lot of good intention with charter schools because they're concerned about what's happening in our public school system, but I really wish that charter schools would take the money that they're spending for charter schools and invest them in our public schools. Because I think that there is a way to integrate the both of them for the purposes of creating a better education system that's equitable and fair for all kids. So that's my feelings about that.
Do we have any questions in the room? Anyone who's here? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and then Laura clarified hers about the attack ads on Prop C. That's what she's referring to.
Attack ads, what specific attack ads? I'm sorry,
like I said, I'm just reading the comments.
So I have not put out any attack ads on Prop C,
Yeah.
so that's all I can say about that.
Like I said, this is just a...
That's fine.
Yeah.
Let's talk about transportation.
Yes,
for a minute.
transportation.
Do you mind talking about transportation? Yeah. Great. So there is a lot of frustration among the Main Street Mamas community in regard to public transportation, especially as somebody just noted, if you do have a stroller. And as mayor, how will you make Muni work better for families?
Yeah.
And are you looking to support bicycles and pedestrians? So how are we going to unclog our streets?
Yeah, and here in San Francisco, there was a time that we just focused on jobs, right? And between 2010 and 2015, for every 8 jobs we created 1 unit of housing, and I feel, neglected our transportation system. And so when I got on the Board of Supervisors, because especially my residents who were in Coal Valley, they were like, all I want you to do is fix the Judah. I'm like, no problem, I'll fix the Judah. And when I got into office, I didn't realize that, we were at an all-time low in terms of the number of Muni drivers. Trains and buses were just in a state of disrepair. we didn't have really a long-term plan of how we were going to basically replace our fleet that was aging and what that would mean, and how we increase capacity as we grow as a city. So I sponsored the legislation to purchase the new bus and train fleet. I pushed to hire more drivers. In fact, we've hired about 700, and we banned the box in San Francisco. So I'm proud that so many people that I grew up with that have, unfortunately have a history and have had challenges getting employment are now driving for Muni. And just making that kind of connection, is the work that I came on the board to do. And it's why I'm running for mayor. But ultimately, we need a long-term strategic plan for our city, for our departments, how we're going to build housing, how we're going to maintain our public safety officials and make sure that as people retire that we backfill those public safety officials, how we improve Muni, how we order enough buses, how we order enough trains, how we deal with the infrastructure so that we make it safe for people to move around and we make sure that it's more convenient to use Muni than it is to do anything else in getting around in San Francisco. And that involves changes to our infrastructure. That involves making sure that we have long-term plans. We are increasing capacity, and these are things that I definitely care about and want to do. I have a lot of information in my transportation plan as well that talks about how we're going to get to a better place, because the city right now is just a lot of construction, a lot of congestion. We have all these different platforms everywhere, like Ubers and Lyfts and Caviars and everything. It's like the wild, wild west. and part of what my responsibility would be as mayor is to understand the data and understand what all of that means, and is to develop a long-term plan to address some of these issues to get us to a better place. It is a city, there will be traffic, but we need to make sure there are more traffic control officers, that we reduce the congestion, that we work with companies to talk about when we can change hours and people can work from home. I mean, there are so many different things that we're gonna need to do as a city to get to a better place with congestion, but one of the most important things is to make public transportation a lot better than it is, and to make sure people get around our streets safely.
And do you have a position on limiting how many Uber drivers or Lyft drivers there are out there, or?
So I think part of the challenge is in saying that, I mean, taxi cabs have medallions. And it's not just about the Ubers and the Lyfts. We have a lot of delivery services all over the city, so I don't think it's fair to just target one group, but I do think we need to understand the data so that we can make a determination as to whether or not there should be limits, because the congestion is coming from a lot of different places. And to understand the data, like Lyft is the only company that I'm aware of that's actually sharing data with us so that we could have a better understanding of its impacts, on the city. So I think part of what we need is information. They're not required to provide that information, which is where our state officials come in and could be very helpful in working with us to get that information so that we can determine, what we can do as a city. Because if we tax these industries, the tax will just definitely be paid by the consumers. We have to figure out ways in which, I don't mind taxing, I don't mind figuring out creative ways. I'm open to congestion pricing, but I want to make sure that any decision we make is informed by data, and it's not just targeted at one industry or one group of one platform.
We have a live question. Oh, two. Okay.
Yay.
So, how about?
Can you guys introduce yourselves when you ask?
Hi, I'm Sarah Salim. I work here at Urban Sitter. I'm so glad you're here. This has been fascinating already. And speaking of Lyft and Uber and tech and data, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your position on technology in San Francisco, in particular the relationship between long-standing residents and certainly this influx of people that are looking to make San Francisco their home and become future long-term residents. How do we navigate that?
Yeah, and I got to tell you, this has been kind of strange, mostly because you do have a lot of new people who are coming into San Francisco, and then a lot of folks who feel neglected and like they're being priced out and pushed out because of this new industry, and it's creating, I know, a lot of tension. For me, as someone who grew up in a neighborhood that was neglected, people didn't come to the projects where I lived, and they also made me feel less than a person sometimes, because I lived in this particular public housing development, and I just won't treat other people like that. Whether you're a part of an industry, whether you're sadly homeless or any other situation, I don't think it's right to just basically target people because they're a part of an industry. But I do think that the companies have to take responsibility for what's happening in our city. And they need to also participate and contribute financially to helping with housing production in San Francisco, specifically for their employees, so it doesn't have the significant impacts that it has had on pushing people out of the city. That's been really frustrating, this is, to be clear, because I grew up in the Western Addition, my friends and family members were being pushed out of San Francisco before tech got here. So this has been an ongoing struggle here in our city. And I do think that it is important to try and engage the tech community and the people who own these companies and hold them accountable for working with us to provide more housing, specifically, as I said, for their employees. But it doesn't involve, I don't think we should basically say, someone's not welcomed here. I do think that we should say, well, if you're going to be a part of the city, I don't want you to push someone else out in order to be a part of the city. I want your company to work with us. I want you to look at other options, and I just want us to work together more collaboratively to provide solutions to make it better before we get to that point where you're like, okay, we're going to hire 4,100 people in San Francisco. It's like, wait, where are they going to live? How are we going to work together? Slow down just a bit. Let's come up with a plan so that we know that this won't impact the existing population in our city.
Hi, my name's Laura. I'm a fellow USF grad, and I find that a lot of my friends are graduating from SFSU or USF and having a really hard time staying in the city because it's hard to find jobs, or even while going to school, funding yourself while you're trying to study. Can you talk a little bit about young people and how they can stay in San Francisco after they graduate, considering the job market here might be a little difficult for them?
Yeah, well, I'm surprised to hear the job market is difficult because the unemployment rate in San Francisco is like 2.1%.
Maybe I meant for students that were, still studying and still trying to make
Okay.
their way
And I
while
think
they're in classes.
Also,
Yes.
entry-level positions
Right.
as it compares to the cost of living here.
Yeah. And part of it, and just to be clear, okay, I'm still paying off my loans from USF. I had a roommate up until like November last year, and no, he didn't move out because I was running for mayor. He moved out because he moved in with his girlfriend. But come home, Ben. Anyway, I miss him. He was a great roommate. But it's challenging to live in San Francisco, and I think part of it is we as city officials have to do a better job with housing production, and we have to basically work with students. I mean, there could be a direct relationship. I have interns in my office. A lot of them end up applying for opportunities to work for the city where they're making decent salaries, but ultimately it does more than likely lead to a salary where you're still going to need a roommate. And that's naturally a part of what exists in San Francisco. And what I think is important for us to do is find creative ways to get more housing built. And we have in-law units, for example, over 400 applications in the pipeline after we approved making these in-laws legal, and the bureaucracy that's getting in the way. Just imagine what could happen if we put 400 units on the market. So I think part of it is going to be housing production and maybe getting more actively engaged in helping to move housing forward in San Francisco could be very helpful, because as far as housing production goes, sometimes sadly there are people who want housing, but they just don't want housing where they live, and that becomes a challenge. And we need to think about definitely the residents who are here and protecting them and keeping them housed. That's really important, but also San Francisco is growing and so many other people want to live here, and we want to make sure that we continue to build, because that's exactly what we're going to need for the future, and that's just not in San Francisco. That's going to be an entire Bay Area in terms of our approach to getting to a better place. So you could also apply to work at my office as an intern, or paid internships. Oh, I can talk just quickly about this. One of the things that I'm proposing for high school students here in San Francisco is paid internships. What kept me out of trouble is the fact that there was a Mayor's Youth Employment and Training Program, and it wasn't just during the summer. The nonprofit I worked for, they paid me year-round. And that really kept me focused, and we have a lot of young people, especially in our public schools, who come from families that are low-income families, and just not only does that help with a little bit of money for them to basically buy lunch or do the basic things they want to do as teenagers, but it also exposes them to incredible opportunities that sometimes they don't even know exist right in the backyards of where they live. And what I am trying to do is think about the next generation. What are we going to do for the future so that young people are exposed to opportunities early enough so that they know what's possible, they know what they can do in the city, they can get the kind of jobs where they could actually afford to live in San Francisco. Mm-hmm. That's really what I want to push for, because yes, we can solve these problems and work on these issues and make the streets cleaner. Those are definitely important. But what happens to the next generation of young people growing up right now in San Francisco? I don't want the same things to happen to them that happened to my family, that happened to my community, and we have to do something now to make sure that we invest in them, we support them, and they're right in our school system. And so if we provide an opportunity to every last one of them, what a difference it could make in their life and in their future. And that's what I want to do as mayor.
Thanks, London. Do we have time for one more question?
These are some,
I know.
some good questions.
Yeah, I'll just take a peek real quick. We'll ask just,
There's some really good ones, I just want to make sure.
This is a really good one. It's there. Okay, we have a couple minutes. So, Jill says, it's great that you support taking it to the streets, and I do too, but I'd love to hear more about what you've done to clean up the streets as District 5 supervisor. As a Coal Valley Haight Street resident, I think things have gotten better in some ways, but 2 people just overdosed in front of a school. I think this is the urban high school scenario that they're probably referencing, and it was 3 people. The streets are littered with human feces, etc. So interested to know where you personally engage.
Well, actually, and part of it is money and resources to the Haight-Ashbury community. For example, some of the things that we talked about earlier. Number 1 is supporting Take It to the Streets and making sure that they're getting funding and getting sufficient funding to house 64 people who are out there helping to clean the streets. Adding pit stops to the area so that there are restrooms for people to use rather than using the sidewalks as public restrooms. The Fix-It team, which does power washing every single day and is out there with folks from the Department of Public Works. They're out there as we speak. I've been driving through the Haight-Ashbury community and walking through the Haight-Ashbury community for the past couple of weeks on a regular basis. It is definitely a lot cleaner, a lot better than it has been in a long time. The biggest challenge we still have is the behavior of some people who sadly make things difficult for everyone else. And so what I've been doing is increasing resources for the community to make it a better community, including the number of police officers are there, including providing the funding support for many of the programs like Take It to the Streets, Larkin Street Youth, and some of the others that help to support this population. Homeless Youth Alliance, they were actually homeless, and I got Health Right 360 to open their doors and provide them with the space so they're no longer homeless. I know they still need some additional support, but the list goes on, and the challenge is, we do have a segment of the population that continues to be very challenging, and we will continue to work on that.
Thank you. And also, just given our timing and what London and I have already discussed, I think, just so everybody knows, this will be live and it will be viewable later on. So you can go back and also listen to the conversation that we had about how London did support taking it to the streets and securing financials for that later on. So thank you very, very much. I guess I would just close in asking if you have any words of wisdom about how families and women in specific can get involved in politics. I think there's a lot of heavy topics out there, and it feels a bit daunting when you're somebody who isn't maybe like politically savvy or don't know how to take baby steps. What are the baby steps that people can take?
So here's the thing. I always have challenges with finding moms, and so I'd love to, there are a number of committees, of task force and things that, we as members of the Board of Supervisors, we can appoint people to serve on citizens advisory committees or different things involving health, involving kids, involving a number of things. And I'm happy to forward you a list that you can
Sure.
share with your community, especially when there are vacancies. There's also commissions, and the mayor has power to appoint commissioners, as well as the president of the Board of Supervisors. I appoint Department of Building Inspection Commission, planning commissioners, and other things. So I think part of it is you could serve in that capacity. What you're doing with this organization and bringing people together to have these kinds of very important discussions is also important. I know that Parent PAC is another great resource. They work on advocacy, political advocacy, and supporting candidates that they believe that support public schools and support families and kids, and they actually have endorsed my campaign for mayor. And so those are just a few ways, and it's not always political. Just coming together with groups and also making your officials familiar with your positions are important, and also making sure that you support good candidates for the school board, or run for school board yourself. I would love to see more parents run for school board. Because that's really important to me. I want to make our public schools just really incredible because of the opportunity that it provided to me. And, I was a handful when I was a kid, so I kind of owe it to my teachers. But ultimately, I just think...
Well, wallflowers don't make changes,
Yeah, I just think we have... I know it's got to be tough, because my grandmother... we were a handful, and she was older, and she couldn't do all those things. We did them on our own, but she did the best she could. And so I can't even imagine some of the challenges that parents have with raising kids, working, and then expected to be actively engaged in some way or another. But if you have the time to do it, I would strongly suggest that you reach out to me, hopefully when I'm mayor. You reach out to me as a member of the Board of Supervisors, because that's what I am now, and I'm happy to provide you with a list of some things that you can get actively engaged in and start making suggestions. One of the other things to stay on top of is how the Department of Children, Youth, and Families spend their money on programs that serve young people in San Francisco, because we want to make sure that, because there are a lot of programs that get funded to serve kids all over the city, and we want to make sure that those investments are making a difference in young people's lives. And so there are just so many different avenues, and I hope that will be very helpful. But I just think that we have got to invest on the front end. We have got to make sure that young people, and not just our kids, I don't have children. I have a lot of kids, but I don't have children of my own, but I have watched and helped so many young people become incredible adults, and I'm really proud of that because their lives could have went a different way. My life could have went a different way. And so when we think about what we can do better, yes, we should take care of our own children, but we should also think about and invest in other children as well, because all kids should be all of our responsibility if we want a better future for them, especially in a place like San Francisco.
Thanks, London. Thank you so much. Thanks to London Breed for being here with us this afternoon. I also want to thank very much Mina Harris from Mom
Hey,
and Our
Mina.
Hi, Mina, founder of Phenomenal Women campaign, and to Rachel Masters for initiating today and inviting Jane Kim earlier today. So thank you all so much for being here. This is the last of our 4 candidate conversations, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Yes, and don't forget.
And don't forget, get out and
vote on June 5th for London Breed. LondonForMayor.com.